Welcome to Philosophy of Value Workshops number 52 of Series 9. And the question for today is, can we establish the will to value as an inescapable principle of human life? The reading from one of my works, The Pursuit of Value, Chapter 7, Section 7. So I'm starting from the remarkable fact that we exist and that we know that we exist. And this fact can be summed up in the idea of human subjectivity as reflective consciousness. And all other questions like free will, ethics, or meaning or purpose are aspects of this fact. Yet what is crucial in this discussion is the idea of value as an aspect of consciousness. But the question here is, can the will to value be adopted as an inescapable principle of human life? And can there even be a single principle that is also inescapable? It's often thought that human life is too diverse and complex to have one such principle. But I will show that there are commonalities within consciousness that make this possible. And how can a principle be inescapable? Not in Kant's sense of a logical, categorical imperative, but in the sense of inevitability. That is, like the inevitability of life emerging from matter, or mind emerging from life, or the inevitability I'm talking about here of value as the final objective of conscious existence. That is, inevitability under the right circumstances of awareness, reason, and knowledge. But one mistaken and misleading question that also implies such a claim is, what is the meaning of life? It implies that there is one fixed, universal answer that can be found in the order of things. I'm not even going to discuss or argue against this view here. But Ronald Dworkin gives us an alternative version of this singular view in his book Justice for Hedgehogs. Requoting from Archilochus and Isaiah Berlin, Dworkin writes that the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing. Value is one big thing. And I want to argue for the will to value, or the affirmation of value as a principle of life. And I will give both positive and negative reasons for this view. Yet value itself should be firstly briefly defined, and this can be done by noting its different manifestations, such as intentional actions, judgments or descriptions, and objects of value. And value includes these as a general class of things which the will to value affirms. One positive reason for adopting the will to value is that value does what we want as a human objective. This is because it can unify theory and practice. And it is also the basic property of fundamental aspects of life like ethics, meaning, and purpose. Another positive feature is that value is a fundamental constituent of consciousness. Yet the status of value within a basic typology of mind also provides a negative reason for adopting the will to value. That is, other mental states like cognition and affect are not adequate to the task of being a viable human objective. Another negative reason is that not to value value is self-defeating and self-negating. A further negative reason that explains the omission of this principle of value is my previous error theory of value. And I have also presented an error theory of consciousness of which value is a part. Analytic philosophy typically classifies consciousness into the two cognitive and non-cognitive mental states. But this classification is biased towards cognitivism and defines non-cognitive states negatively. Kant gives us the three mental faculties of cognition, feeling and will, which also omits value. So I supplement these classifications with the four states of cognition, affect, will and value. And the different alternative objectives that I will consider are aspects of these four states. And with these different states, I can briefly answer the question, what does the will to value value? The will to value values value as an objective rather than states of cognition, affect or will. One expression of the will to value is self-value rather than vicarious value through, say, God. Another expression is Sartre's repudiation of objective values in his Spirit of Seriousness. And another is my value theory ethics, to be outlined shortly. The above points are about content, but I'd also like to make a couple of points about method. One is that there are alternative ways of looking at things. That is, we can look at things in terms of the agent's perception instead of in terms of an object's features. But like in science, we tend to understand things in terms of their features. That is, until we hear about Thomas Kuhn, value-laden facts, and quantum-related observations. A related point is that I'm not trying to prove something in the face of immovable skepticism. I believe that understanding calls for participation and a searching attitude. But before going through a few alternative objectives, I want to ask you, what is your principle of life? Are you looking for one? Or don't you think it's possible to find one? If not, why not? I ask this because if you don't have questions, answers won't make sense. So I'm not going to spend time arguing against the will of God as a human objective. I also give happiness short shrift because it doesn't explain meaning, purpose or the why of life. We can start instead with Schopenhauer's will to live as an all-pervading underlying principle. And life is also a fundamental value in religious and naturalistic thought. But Jonathan Glover argued that life is a value only as a vehicle for consciousness. And I would add that consciousness is only a value if it is valued. Yet Nietzsche also rejected Schopenhauer's will to live and replaced it with the will to power. Like Nietzsche, I find that the will to live isn't specific enough to resolve the issue or issues of human life. And unlike survival instincts, it can't explain animal life that doesn't have the concept of life. The deer flees, for example, not because of the fear of death, but because of instinctual fears. More interestingly, the will to power is about control over oneself, one's body, and over one's environment. Nietzsche regarded the will to power as a principle in all life, from protoplasm to human life, and it's manifestly effective in human and social life, attested to by postmodernists like Foucault. But there's severe problems for the will to power as an ethical or human objective. Firstly, the will to power is a biological principle that can't be used in ethics or as a principle of life. Also, power or control is a kind of relation with things, and a relation isn't the same thing as an experience or mental state that can provide ethical or human satisfaction. So the will to power needs something further to explain its appeal. The answer is, in my view, the will to value discussed here. But also consider truth, or the will to truth, as a primary human objective. To begin with, it's an inescapable condition of every inquiry. But more than that, truth also makes inescapable moral claims on us, and it calls us to go beyond ourselves. But there is no absolute truth or final theory of truth. There are only competing theories of truth. And as Moore, Russell, Frege, Tarski, Davidson and Williams agree, truth can't be definitively defined. And even if truth could be defined, it would still remain only a bare cognitive conception of something. So like the satisfactions of power, the satisfactions of truth must be explained in terms of its effects. And I argue that those effects are best explained in terms of value. The idea of the will to value is itself also too simplistic and unqualified. So the notion of truth or the will to truth is one of the ways that the will to value can be qualified. Yet in my view, the indeterminable character of truth renders it a fortuitous criterion of moral value. This is because the preferred objects of value should be incomplete. Sartre, for example, described value as a lack or absence. Robert Nozick described value as a possibility. And in ethical terms, moral fortitude is doing the right thing without excessive social or ideological support. Conversely, unwarranted support is a moral failing, described by Williams as self-indulgence. But I'm also working towards the idea of value as a principle of human life expressed in ethics or morals. This is first seen in that ethical principles are values that provide moral guidance. But I think that a deeper interpretation of ethics in terms of value can also be made. This follows from challenges to the very concept of ethics from historical interpretations, from psychology, and from alternative calibrations of human life, such as Nietzsche's aesthetic justification. So the concept of ethics can be challenged and possibly replaced by a phenomenology of value. So I would like to offer my own interpretations of ethics both now and later. That is, I want to define ethics as the process of reflecting moral valuations back onto the agent. And that reflection of value back onto the agent accounts for the elevating experience of ethics. This is because that value is characterized by the agent himself as ethical. That is, as opposed to being characterized as a religious or a aesthetic value. And these different characterizations account for different value experiences. So what I'm doing here is interpreting fundamental aspects of human life in terms of value. And I want to show this happening in at least two ways. One is that basic aspects of human life, like religion, ethics, self-esteem, and romance, express strong values. Another is that this indicates that value is the basic drive underlying these aspects of human life. That is, self-esteem and a drive for meaning are a bottom line that can't be avoided. With respect to ethics as an aspect of life, I noted that ethical principles are values that provide moral guidance. Then, in religion, God is the highest believer's value, together with a whole system of value and meaning. And a meaningful life is a worthwhile and valuable life, as well as a lot of other things. I won't list all the other human activities that we can interpret in terms of value. But my second point was that these expressions of value indicate that value is a basic underlying drive. This rests on empirical observation of widespread religious sentiment, universal moral impulses, and self-esteem or self-value as a bottom line motivation that is found in every human endeavour. Yet these are empirical observations, but I want to support them with a theory of mind from phenomenology. Heidegger, for example, cites care as the being of Dasein, and Sartre writes that the being of the self is value. And Sartre goes further to say that choice and consciousness are one and the same thing, and that every choice supposes elimination and selection, thereby producing value. That is, elimination and selection presuppose preference, which are expressions of value. Sartre also writes, choice isn't just preference, but a selection traced back to its ontological foundation. Yet in my view, choice as selection need not be a deliberated choice of reflective consciousness. That is, selection can also be a preconscious or an unconscious event in an underlying structure. But Sartre's ultra-phenomenological analysis cannot include such preconditions or unconscious events. Yet a graduated conception of consciousness enables us to trace the origins of selection further back. And we can also say that contrast and selection are expressions of choice that produce value. For example, when I look left or right, I affirm what is on my right and negate what is on my left. These are the kind of selections that are essential to epistemic contrasts and perceptions as well as to value. For example, a white spot on a white board can't be seen. It needs a contrast. And such contrasts and divisions in the world are mirrored in the origins of value. This is a phenomenological and structural account of the origins of value in consciousness, and it is only a brief outline of an account that isn't widely accepted. But I will continue in this way to explain the problem of human existence that I'm trying to resolve. One way that Sartre presents the problem of human existence is in the relations between consciousness, that he calls being for itself, and physicality or facticity, that he calls being in itself. For Sartre, subjective being for itself is a kind of nothingness or a lack or desire for being. Yet physical being in itself is a plenitude or permanence that has independent existence. So here, mankind is a useless passion in seeking the permanence of physicality. But instead of Sartre's useless passion in seeking the permanence of physicality, in my view, a more viable alternative can be found in pursuing a sufficiency of value. And again, in my view, that sufficiency of value is a result of the will to value. Yet that raises the question of what is a sufficiency of value, and is such value even possible? Before answering that question, I want to comment on Sartre's view of the problem of human existence. That is, instead of describing consciousness as a lack of being, I would use the word insubstantiality. And insubstantiality is explicable in terms of structures like divisibility, graduation, and temporality. Divisibility creates problems like personal fragmentation, internal conflicts, and alienation. Graduation means that we not only develop but also diminish and eventually die. And temporality produces impermanence and change. Again, this kind of analysis might not be accepted, but even if it is, there are questions to be asked here, such as even Sartre would ask, how can an ontological problem of existence be resolved in terms of value. For example, he himself says that ontology itself cannot formulate ethical precepts. But I have a simple answer that introduces the idea of problems of existence being resolved in terms of value. That is, let's say you lose $50. You can either resolve the problem by being reimbursed or by coming to terms with your loss with the benefits and consolations of that outcome. Yet this raises the question of how can value be the kind of thing that can do this? One common objection is that value is an abstract concept without any substantive existence. But value is a general or collective term that represents particular values that do have substantive existence. And values can be actions like wanting or liking, or their objects like money or truth. Yet values can also be states like love, hate, worship, resentment, respect, or distaste. And this is why I've had to coin the term value states. And in my view, some value states have a certain sufficiency that is sometimes described as intrinsic value. For example, moral fortitude is doing the right thing without unwarranted social or ideological support. Aristotle's crowning virtue was magnanimity, or a greatness of soul that doesn't seek retribution. And a qualified self-esteem also has an independence and value in itself. These are, of course, explanative statements, not arguments. I make these arguments elsewhere. Yet we can also explain that the sufficiency of value results from the aggregate choices of the will to value. That is, it seems self-evident that choices for the will to value will lead to a certain kind of value, and that kind of value and the values to be chosen have just been outlined. But we must not take it for granted that ethical or human values have to be chosen. They do have to be chosen. Yet we can't choose values just because they are logical, natural, or have overriding impulses or drives. Explaining this choice is difficult. It can't just be a Kantian categorical imperative. Neither can it be justified by Mill's claim that it's metaphysically and psychologically impossible to desire anything unpleasant. But like the claim that logic and mathematics have to be justified by principles within its own system, Hume, Nietzsche, Dworkin and Williams believe that ethics should also provide its own foundation. Yet that can only be done if ethical principles necessarily engage the will in our choices. Kant and Mill thought they could be done with reason and pleasure respectively. I think it can be done with value as a principle of life or of ethics. But I want to get there by asking, why should we choose value or values? The short answer is because, as noted earlier, value does what we need it to do. That is, it can explain principles of ethics, meaning, purpose, romance, religion, and the why of life. But cognitive states like belief or knowledge and affect states like happiness or pleasure cannot. This claim may be taken as intuitively compelling, or it could be argued as part of the standard cognitive non-cognitive debate. Instead, I will try to indicate how values might be obtained from the sphere of value itself. To do this, I want to go back to the idea of choice and value as inescapable constituents of consciousness. But I think that Sartre's condemned to be free as a justification of freedom can't be justified. Yet his repudiation of the spirit of seriousness in taking subjective values as objective has a basis in fact. That is, as the descriptivists might say, it's an objective fact that value is subjective. And to take value as objective is not only erroneous, but also inauthentic and self-indulgent. So what I'm trying to do here is to establish values on the subjective structures of consciousness and value. Such structures are rife in existentialism and phenomenology. I previously noted the structures of divisibility, temporality, and graduation. I can give another instance of obtaining values by using the structure of graduation. Firstly, we might agree that values are valenced or graduated, which provides an internal standard of judgment. So we might also agree that some actions are better or worse than others. Therefore, I might be able to claim it's disproportionate to kill some people in order to make money, and its judgment is made without reference to an absolute external standard. But it's still in need of a value theory ethics to support this judgment. Yet, given the above facts about value, there are other things we can say that constrain and guide value choices. I made out a list of criteria for the priority of values in my notes for this paper. But not to value value is contradictory, self-negating and self-defeating because we ought to value value. Firstly, not to value value is contradictory because it denies value premises of activities that can't be avoided. It's self-defeating because it prevents the human satisfactions that must ultimately be experienced in terms of value. And it's self-negating because it's a choice to negate value, when both choice and value are constituents of consciousness that enable choice and value. Yet these are extensive claims that should be discussed further. Yet finally, as an expression of the idea of the will to value, I would like to outline a value theory of ethics. I usually introduce my value theory ethics by comparison to virtue theory ethics. Yet value theory ethics can be also introduced by comparison to a value-based theory of reasons for action. Such a value theory of action has been adopted by Derek Parfit and Barry Maguire. This is an alternative to cognitive and desire-based or non-cognitive theories of action. On a value-based theory of action, actions bring about some valuable state of affairs. But a value theory ethics goes further to claim that values can guide as well as motivate action. That is, the choice for or affirmation of the will to value can, as might be expected, guide our actions. Take, for example, the earlier notion of truth, not as an absolute datum, but as a regulative attitude. That is, thinkers like Kant and Popper defined truth not as a constitutive, but as a guiding regulative concept. And Paniel Rees Cardenas finds truth as a regulative attitude in both Hegel and Kierkegaard. For example, again, truth is presupposed in every inquiry or undertaking, but to consciously not to presuppose truth implies self-deception, inauthenticity, and thereby also a loss of self-esteem and self-value. For a more practical example, take harming others for no good reason. That is, harming others without cause is pathological, which reflects negative value onto the agent. Even more tellingly, such intentions often indicate low self-esteem or self-value, to which the will to value and resulting self-value is an antidote. But what is the principle on which actions are judged to reflect positive or negative value? It can't be just ethical conventions which value theory ethics claims to supersede. And it would also exclude purely pain and pleasure from assessments of moral value. But ultimately, actions can be assessed on the attainment of value through the will to value. Yet unlike Kantian ethics, value theory ethics is fallibilist because it depends on the individual's best judgments. This is a strength, not a weakness, because it rejects the false belief that certain beliefs or intentions are necessarily related to particular actions thought to be ethical. Yet value theory ethics is fallibilist in at least two ways. One, that acting agents may be unaware of or indifferent to the will to value and thereby not motivated by it. And two, actions are guided by the agent's best judgments that are contingent and fallible. Yet this does not mean that the principle of the will to value isn't inescapable and eventually inevitable. The will to value is inescapable and inevitable as both a theoretical and practical ideal. But it may not be realized in some people's experience or in some people's lifetimes. I'm fine with this because I don't want to find ways of compelling people to act in certain ways. I want to understand life, value, and what people call ethics. And I want to find a direction in life for people who are looking for one. So that's my conclusion, that the will to value is an inescapable principle of human life based on an underlying propensity to value, the inherent satisfaction of value and the rational choice for value. Yet affirming the will to value and finding some sufficiency of value is by no means the end of the story. Many different states of value and the relation to cognitive objects or schemas need to be worked out. And that is the question that most people are almost exclusively focused on. Yet the question of what is value and what is the particular mode of value at issue are crucial. Different modes of value are determined by their cognitive, affective and volitional components, and these constituents and the relations remain to be worked out. In that vein, I'd like to finally quote Aristotle, who said that a knowledge of the good is of great importance to us for the conduct of our lives. Are we not more likely to achieve our aim if we have a target? If this is so, we must try to describe, at least in outline, what the good really is. Unquote.